There are things a man learns to expect from the wilderness, and then there are things that wait for him at home, and I have come to believe the second kind cut deeper. After 2 long winters trapping the high hollows of the Ozark backcountry, I came down out of the timber expecting nothing but rot and ruin. Instead, I found turned earth, mended fences, smoke rising sweet from my own chimney, and a boy I had never laid eyes on splitting my wood like he owned the ground he stood on. I did not know it yet, but that boy carried the only piece of my old life worth keeping, and the men coming down the valley behind him meant to burn it all to ash. My name is Eli Hartwell, and in the autumn of 1868 I was 41 years old and harder than a hickory knot. I had spent the better part of 3 years working a string of traps along the headwaters of the Current River, living off jerked venison and black coffee, sleeping under hides while the wind worked at me like a whetstone. The war had taken everything soft I ever had. I went into the deep country a man with no kin and no patience for the company of others, and I came out the same way, leading a pack horse and a sway-backed mule, both loaded heavy with beaver, mink, and fox that would fetch a fair purse down at the landing. I did not care about the money. My bones ached with a cold that no fire reached anymore, and all I wanted was the little corn and hog farm I had bought with my mustering out pay, tucked in a river bottom where the ridges came together like cupped hands. I had left it sealed and abandoned, the door barred, the chimney capped, fully expecting the briars and the field mice to have it by now. A man does not tend what he means to leave behind. The last ridge dropped me down through a stand of yellowing oak, and the smell reached me before the sight did. Wood smoke. Fresh. The kind that comes off a cook stove and not a wildfire. I reined in hard and sat there a long minute with my heart going strange in my chest. Then I cleared the trees and saw it. My farm was not a ruin. The split-rail fence I had thrown up loose and crooked stood straight now, reinforced with fresh withes and new posts. The corn had been cut and shocked into neat teepees across the bottom field. A milk cow grazed in the side lot, and there were hogs, good fat hogs, rooting in a pen that had not been there when I left. The barn roof, which I remembered sagging, had been patched over with riven shakes so new they still showed pale at the edges. And against the south wall of my cabin stood a rick of split stovewood stacked so square and tight you could have measured it with a carpenter's rule. Somebody had not just squatted on my land, somebody had loved it. I climbed down slow, my joints stiff from the saddle, and slid my sharps out of its scabbard. The frontier in those years was thick with men who had come out of the war crooked and stayed that way, drifters and bushwhackers who took what they pleased because there was no law in the hills to tell them otherwise. I had killed before, and I did not relish doing it again, but I would not stand in my own dooryard and be told I had no claim to it. I had crossed maybe half the distance to the porch, moving quiet the way a man learns to move when his supper depends on it, when something hit me in the back of the leg like a sledgehammer. I went down on one knee in the dirt with a grunt, swinging the rifle around, and found myself staring into the yellow devil eyes of a goat. A nanny goat, gray and white, with a hard little udder swinging beneath her, and exactly one horn jutting crooked off the left side of her skull where the right one had been broken clean off. She stamped, lowered her head, and let out a sound like a rusty gate. "Get," I told her. She charged again. I sidestepped, and she sailed past and butted the corner post of the porch hard enough to rattle the whole structure, then turned around looking pleased with herself, as if knocking the wind out of a grown man was the precise duty God had set her on this earth to perform. That was when the cabin door opened, and a long shotgun barrel came poking out of the gap, and a boy's voice, cracking high with fear, said, "Mister, you take one more step toward my house, and I'll fill you so full of lead they'll bury you with a plow." I went still. He came out onto the porch behind the gun, and he was no outlaw, no hardened drifter come to steal a man's living. He was a boy, 14, maybe 15, all knees and elbows, in a man's shirt cut down and stitched to fit him, his sandy hair hanging in his eyes, his bare feet planted on the boards like he meant to grow roots there. The shotgun was an old percussion piece nearly as long as he was tall, and he held it the way a boy holds a thing he is more afraid of than the man he is pointing it at. But his hands did not shake, and his jaw was set, and his eyes had that flat, cornered look I had seen on creatures with nothing left to lose. "Your house," I said. "My house." He thumbed the hammer back. The goat trotted up the steps and stood beside him, glaring at me with her one horn, and I will be honest, between the two of them I did not rightly know which to watch. My pa and me cleared this bottom. I shucked that corn. I mended that fence. You're trespassing, and I want you off my land before I count to 3. "Boy," I said, "I felled the timber for the walls behind you. I dug the well you're drinking from. I laid that hearthstone with my own 2 hands 4 years back." I did not lower the sharps, but I did not raise it either, and I kept my voice low, and even the way you talk to a spooked colt. "Somebody's lied to you, son. Whatever you were told, you were swindled. The name on the deed to this place is Hartwell." The shotgun barrel dropped a full inch. The boy's face changed all at once, the hard cornered look falling away and something young and lost rising up underneath it. And the goat, sensing the change in him, leaned against his leg. "Hartwell," he whispered. He said it like a word in a language he had only ever read and never heard spoken. "Eli Hartwell." I felt the cold finger of something I could not yet name run down my spine. "That's right. You're him." His voice broke clean in half. "You're really him, you ain't dead." "I look dead to you." Pa said. He stopped. He lowered the shotgun the rest of the way until the muzzle pointed at the porch boards, and his whole body seemed to fold in on itself like a thing that had been holding up a great weight and had just now been allowed to set it down. Pa said if anything ever happened to him, I was to come to the Hartwell place on the current and find a man named Eli. He said you'd take me in. He said you were the only honest man he ever rode with. The sharps grew very heavy in my hands. "What was your pa's name, boy?" "Daniel," he said. "Daniel Reeves." I had not heard that name spoken in 11 years. And hearing it now in a boy's broken voice in my own dooryard near put me on the ground a second time. Daniel Reeves. We had trapped the Yellowstone country together when we were both young and stupid, and certain we would live forever. He had pulled me out of a frozen river once with his bare hands. I had carried him 9 miles through a blizzard with a busted leg another time. We had parted ways before the war over nothing I could even rightly remember anymore, the way young men do, each of us too proud to be the one to write first. I never knew he had married. I never knew he had a son. I lowered my rifle and set the butt of it in the dirt and just looked at the boy, and the boy looked at me, and the goat looked at the both of us like we were fools, which I suppose we were. "Come inside," I said. "You'll catch your death out here barefoot, and get that creature off my porch." Her name was Duchess. The boy informed me as though I had asked, and she did not take orders from anybody, which I would come to learn was the truest thing he said that whole night. Inside, the cabin was so changed I scarcely knew it. When I left it had been a bare box, 4 walls and a hearth and a tick of straw on a rope bedstead. Now there were braided rugs on the puncheon floor, and strings of dried apples and peppers hanging from the rafters, and crocks of put-up beans and tomatoes lined neat along a shelf the boy must have pegged up himself. A second bunk had been built into the far corner. It was a home. A poor one, a hard-scraped one, but a home, and a 14-year-old child had made it alone. He showed me the letter then, drawing it out from an oilcloth pouch he wore on a string round his neck, and I knew Daniel's hand the second I saw it, that careful, slanting script he had been so proud of because he was the only man in our outfit who could read or write. The paper was worn soft as cloth from handling. It told a story I pieced together over coffee, while the fire snapped and Duchess made a nuisance of herself at the door. Daniel had settled in Kansas after the war, married, lost his wife to the fever, and then last spring had taken sick himself. Knowing he was dying, he had spent his last strength telling his boy the one safe road he knew. Go to Eli. Eli Hartwell on the Current River in the Missouri Ozarks. He bought a farm there, The river bottom past the second ford. He is the only man I would trust with you." The boy had buried his father, sold the mule, and walked and begged rides the whole long way down through the bleeding country alone. And when he got here and found the place empty and barred, he had simply moved in and waited, because he had nowhere else in all the world to go, and because his father had told him this was home. "I figured you was dead," we said. He was a Reeves through and through. I could see Daniel in the set of his jaw. "I figured the bank or somebody would come run me off come spring, but I didn't have nowhere else, so I just kept it up. I kept it nice. So's when somebody come, they'd see I weren't no tramp. They'd see I could work." I had to look into the fire a while before I trusted myself to speak. "Your pa pulled me out of the Yellowstone River once," I said finally. "Water cold enough to stop your heart. He went in after me when no sensible man would have. I'd be 11 years dead at the bottom of that river if it weren't for Daniel Reeves." I looked at the boy. "A debt like that don't die when the man does. You understand me. You're not getting run off anything. This is your home as much as it's mine. More, maybe. You're the one who kept it breathing." Wes Reeves did not cry. He was too much his father's son for that. But he turned his face away and busied himself with the fire, and his shoulders shook just once, and when he turned back, he was a different boy than the cornered animal who had met me at the door with a shotgun. He was a boy who had a place to stand. It should have ended there, two lonesome souls finding they were not so alone after all. But the boy had something else to tell me, and he told it in a low voice with his eyes on the dark window. There was a man named Most Tanner working the valley. He had ridden with the bushwhackers during the war, we said, the kind that burned and robbed under no flag but their own, and when the fighting stopped he had simply kept on, gathering a dozen hard men around him in a camp up the headwaters. All summer they had been bleeding the scattered farms of the bottom dry. A hog here, a milk cow there, a barn fired when a man complained too loud. 2 families had already pulled up stakes and gone. Tanner had taken to riding through and telling folks the river bottom was his now, that he meant to run cattle on it, and that anyone still squatting on it come the first hard frost would answer to him. He come by here in September, we said, looked at the corn, looked at the hogs, said a half-grown boy alone wouldn't last the winter and he'd be back to collect what was his. The boy's jaw tightened. I told him my pa's friend was coming. I told him a Hartwell held this ground. He looked at me and the fear in his eyes was not for himself. "I reckon I shouldn't have. I reckon I just brought him down on you." "No," I said. "You did right." But a cold weight had settled in my belly, because a man like Tanner does not give up ground he has decided is his, and a boy boasting that a hard man was coming would only have moved up his calendar. We ate supper. The boy had killed a young shote and we had fresh pork and corn dodgers, and it was the best meal I had eaten in 2 years, sitting at my own table across from Daniel Reeves's son, with the fire warm and Duchess complaining at the door to be let in. I felt something in my chest I had not felt since before the war, something I had spent 3 years in the timber trying to forget I had ever wanted. I felt like a man with somewhere to belong. That is the cruelty of it, I have come to think. The world waits until you have something to lose before it comes for you. The torch came arcing out of the dark like a falling star. I saw it through the window, a tumbling spark, and I was up and moving before my mind had named the thing, knocking the boy out of his chair and onto the floor as the front window blew inward in a spray of glass, and the night came alive with gunfire. The torch had landed short, in the dirt of the dooryard, where it sputtered and smoked. But the rifles in the tree line did not miss. Lead came through the wall, through the door, splintering the table where Wee's plate had sat a heartbeat before, knocking a crock of beans off the shelf to shatter on the floor. "Stay down!" I hauled the boy behind the heavy hearthstone, the only thing in that cabin that would turn a bullet, and reached up and dragged my Sharps and his old shotgun down beside us. Outside I could hear them now. The whoop and holler of men who had done this before and enjoyed it, the drum of hooves circling, the crack and crack of lever-action rifles. There were a lot of them, More than a dozen by the noise. "How many guns you got loaded?" I asked the boy. His face was white, but his hands were already moving, checking the shotgun's caps. "That one in Pa's pistol under the bunk." "Get it." He went on his belly across the floor while I knocked out a pane and put the sharps through it and waited. I did not fire blind. A man learns the worth of a charge of powder living off what he can kill. A shape moved against the moonlit field, a man rising to throw another torch, and I let my breath out slow and squeezed, and the big rifle slammed back into my shoulder, and the man folded down into the corn stubble and did not rise again. A voice bellowed out of the dark, big and easy and amused, the voice of a man who held all the cards and knew it. "Hartwell," it called. "Eli Hartwell, so you ain't dead after all." The boy weren't lying. A laugh rolled across the bottom. "Don't change nothing, though. This here's Tanner's Valley now, every foot of it, and you're squatting on it. So here's my one offer, and I'm a generous man. You and the whelp ride out tonight, walk away with your lives, and I keep the land and the stock. Or you stay, and come morning we drag what's left of you both out of the ashes. You got till I finish this cigar to decide." I looked at the boy crouched beside me in the dark, his father's pistol gripped in both his hands, 14 years old and steady as a fence post, and I understood that most Tanner had made a mistake that was going to cost him everything. He thought he was burning out a worn trapper and an orphan. He did not know what Daniel Reeves had put into that boy, and he did not know what 20 years in the deep timber had made of me. Weeze turned to me. His voice was very quiet. "If I go out there," he said, "if I give myself up, he might let you keep the place. It's your land. Pa wanted you to have it. I won't have you die over me." I put my hand flat over the boy's two hands where they held the pistol. "The way you steady a thing that matters." "Your pa went into a frozen river for me when there was no sense in it," I said. "He didn't ask was it worth his life. He just came. A man doesn't trade away the only family he's got, Weeze. Not for land, not for anything." I looked him dead in the eye. "You're a Reeves and you're under my roof, and that makes you mine to look after. We're not running. Now listen close, because we're not going to win this trading lead with 12 men. We're going to win it the only way 2 against 12 ever wins anything. We're going to use the ground." Because I knew this ground. I had cleared it and dug it and bled into it. And Tanner's men, for all their guns, were strangers to it in the dark. I told the boy what I needed, and he was up and moving through the back of the cabin while I kept the sharps barking out the window to hold their attention. There was an irrigation gate at the head of the bottom where I had dammed a spring branch to flood the corn rows in a dry year. The ground below it was soft black gumbo that would swallow a horse to the fetlock. There was the hog pen, full of fat, angry shoats, set right along the only easy approach to the cabin from the creek. And there was the field itself, the cut corn standing in dry shocks across the whole bottom, and the wind out of the northwest, and a box of lucifer matches on the mantel. When Tanner's cigar burned down and his men came, they came the way he had planned. A mounted rush up the creek bottom meant to overrun us before we could reload. But Weeze had thrown the flood gate, and the soft ground had gone to black soup in the dark, and the first horses hit it at a dead run and went down screaming and threw their riders into the muck. And the boy had thrown open the hog pen, and a dozen squealing, terrified shoats came boiling out into the middle of the milling, cursing men. And a horse will do murder to itself trying to get away from a thing it cannot see in the dark. And then I touched a match to the dry corn shocks on the upwind edge of the field, and the northwest wind took the fire and ran it down across the bottom in a wall of flame and smoke that turned the whole night orange. And most Tanner's hard men found themselves bogged and bucked and burning, lit up bright as day for any rifle in the dark, and not one of them able to find the 2 of us behind the wall of smoke. It was not a battle after that, it was a rout. And it was not only us. I had not counted on it, but the fire that lit the bottom could be seen for miles, and the gunfire had carried up the valley, and the scattered folk of the current had been waiting all that long summer for somebody to stand up to most Tanner. The widow Hester Bell came first, down the river road in her late husband's coat with his old rifle, and behind her came the Calhoun brothers and Old Man Petty, and the Stark family. Every soul Tanner had bled and bullied and frightened, drawn by the fire like it was a beacon lit on purpose, which I suppose in a way it was. They came up out of the dark on every side and put their guns into the burning field, and Tanner's men, those still horsed, broke and scattered into the night with the whole valley howling at their heels. Most Tanner himself I found at the edge of the firelight, his horse down and thrashing in the flood mud, the man himself crawling free of it, mud to his chest, clawing for the pistol on his hip. He was a big man, bigger than me, with a heavy jaw and small mean eyes, and he got the pistol up and got off one wild shot that creased my arm like a hot iron before I closed the distance and knocked it spinning out of his hand. He swung at me and we went down together in the muck, and he was strong, terribly strong, and he got his big hands around my throat and bore down with all his weight, and the firelight started to go dark at the edges. Then there was a sound like the world cracking in two, and Tanner screamed and let go of my throat and rolled away clutching his hand, and I dragged in a breath of smoke and air and looked up. Wes Reeves stood over us with his father's pistol still smoking, his feet planted, his jaw set exactly the way I had seen it set in his father 100 years ago across 100 campfires. He had not shot to kill. He had shot the pistol that was never there from Tanner's reaching hand, a shot no grown man in that valley could have made, and he held the gun steady on the big man now and did not waver. "You're done," the boy said. "Get off our land." I got to my feet. I hauled most Tanner up by the collar, mud and all, and I put my face close to his. "You're going to ride out of this valley tonight," I told him, "and you're going to keep riding, and if I ever see you or any man of yours on the current again, I will not chase you to the county line. I will chase you to wherever you sleep, and I will be the last thing you ever see. Now get." He got. He found a loose horse and he hauled himself into the saddle, cradling his ruined hand, and he rode off north into the dark without a word, and the whole valley watched him go. And somebody laughed, and then they were all laughing and shouting and pounding each other, the way folk do when a long fear lifts off them all at once. The widow Bell brought a jar of salve for my arm, and the Calhounds helped us beat out the field fire before it reached the barn. And Old Man Petty allowed as how he'd been wanting to do that to Tanner for 2 years and only needed somebody to go first. They stayed half the night, and there was coffee, and somebody had a fiddle, and for the first time since I had come down off that ridge I understood that the valley was not a collection of scared, scattered people. It was a community. It had only needed a reason to stand together, and a half-grown boy and a worn-out trapper had given them one. It was near dawn before the last of them went home, and Wheeze and I sat on the porch in the gray light with Duchess between us, the goat having appeared from wherever she had hidden herself during the fight, entirely unharmed and deeply offended that nobody had been guarding the porch in her absence. The boy had a cut over his eye and I had a furrow in my arm, and the bottom field was half burned and would have to be replanted come spring, and neither of us had ever felt better in our lives. "You think he'll come back?" Wheeze asked. "Maybe," I said. "Men like Tanner don't take a beating easy, but we'll be ready. There's a whole valley standing with us now, and that's a thing he can't ride down." The boy was quiet a while. Then he said, not looking at me, "Pa was right about you." I looked out at the river bottom where the sun was just touching the burned and unburned corn alike, my land, his land, our land, and I thought about Daniel Reeves going into the frozen Yellowstone with no thought for himself, and I understood at last what he had been trying to give his boy at the end. Not a farm, not a roof, a man who would come, a place to belong. "Your pa was right about a lot of things," I said. "It just took me 11 years and a fire to figure out which ones." I had ridden down off that mountain a man alone, the way I had been alone my whole life, certain that solitude was the only safe thing the world had left to offer me. I had been wrong. A home is not the timber in its walls or the deed with your name on it. A home is who's sitting beside you when the fires burned low. I had gone into the wilderness to be rid of people, and I had come out of it to find that the only thing worth having had been waiting on my own porch the whole time, splitting my wood, keeping my fire, guarded by a one-horned goat with the disposition of a fallen angel. We buried the dead tanner left behind, decent, in the corner of the bottom, because even hard men deserve that much. And then Wheeze and I set about the work of making the place ready for winter, and for whatever came after together. But most Tanner did not die in the river mud that night. He rode north out of the valley with a ruined hand and a black heart, and a hatred for the name Hartwell that would only grow through the long cold months. Somewhere up the headwaters, in a camp we could not see, a beaten man was already gathering the scattered remnant of his gang and nursing his grudge by a guttering fire. The first frost had not even hard-bit the bottom yet. The true reckoning for the current river valley was still coming, and when it came, it would not be a torch in the dark. It would be war. If this story stirred something in you, the way the firelight stirs the dark, do me the kindness of pressing that like button and sharing it with someone who loves a good frontier tale. Subscribe and ring the bell so you don't miss the next chapter, because most Tanner is not finished with Eli and the boy, not by a long road. And tell me down in the comments, do you think Eli was right to take the boy in? And what would you have done, alone in that valley with the torches coming out of the dark? I read everyone. Until next time, keep your fire warm and your people close.